Thank you very much, Sally, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and to thank you for the warm welcome. I'm very conscious in having tried to go back in time over the last 10 years of the number of people who have contributed to the 45 and up study over time. And I'm also conscious as I find each person, I think I must thank them and I must thank them. So I'm going to try and sort of generally acknowledge people as they go through, but I don't think it's actually possible to thank everybody who's contributed. So if there's somebody I haven't thanked, rest assured that we are all incredibly grateful and that it's not through want of trying. So I'm going to just take you through a little bit of the history of the 45 and up study, do my sort of general progress update, and then a bit about future plans. So I'd like to really thank Michael for that talk because I was going to say sort of the background was about population ageing and how important it is to have information about it, but in fact I think Michael's done a better job than I could possibly have done in emphasising the need for this kind of data. So it was with that idea in mind that I think it was in 1999 there was a conversation between Sally Redman and Valerie Beryl, which was pretty much, and it might have even been a bit later than that, pretty much along the lines of wouldn't it be great to have a large-scale cohort study in Australia, a bit like the Million Women study? And I think Sally responded with, well, I'm not sure that'd be possible. And then Valerie said, oh, no, but you could. I think you probably could. It was also around 1999 that the germ of the ideas for what then became the Sachs Institute happened. So in a way, the journey of the 45 and up study is also the journey of the Sachs Institute. And as I've gone through the slides, I can actually, and the photos, I've actually seen that there are this sort of parallel development in a way. So I've just put 1999 to 2002 for these things sort of gestating because it's a bit hard to pin down exactly when things happened. And quite often what does happen in these circumstances is that a lot of people think of the same thing at once as well, and ideas gel and things come together. The other thing that was really important in 2002 when Valerie said, why don't you do a study like that? And Sally said, no, I don't think it'd be possible, was that Freddie Cetus and Andrew Penman from the Cancer Council came forward and said, well, if you were going to do something like that, there would be potential for support from the Cancer Council. And I think without those things coming together, nothing would have gotten off the ground, really. So it was with that background that a steering group was formed in early 2003, and I've actually dug up some photos, and you'll be pleased to know that people haven't changed a bit. So this was the original steering group. I couldn't actually find a photo of Mark Woodward. He doesn't seem to have a web presence, except that Mark Woodward is actually the name of Tom Jones's sort of son. So there were a lot of pictures of Tom Jones's son, but none of my actual Mark Woodward. So Bruce was the first chair of that group, and then Freddie Cetus took over as chair. This is John Beard, Julie Biles, ignore that person, Sally Redman, Louisa Jorm, Valerie Beryl was on the original steering group, Mark Harris, Beverly Raphael, Michael Hennesley, Stephen Corbett, who hasn't changed a bit, Wayne Smith, Bob Cumming and Adrian Bowman. So this group of people over time were really part of, first of all, commissioning the writing of the protocol, but also inputting into the process of developing the study methods and also the study questionnaire. So as you can imagine, it was hard work. The study has really been designed as a collaborative resource from the outset, and that's a very unusual design. I think all of us know of the sort of general model of studies is that people have a few bright ideas and put together a questionnaire. This was really, from the very beginning, there were workshops held with researchers saying this is going to be your resource, how would you like it to be? But if you then ask that of researchers and then try and put together a questionnaire based on that, you know that you're asking for trouble. So there were over 120 collaborating researchers who worked through the steering group to design the study. So, that's right. So I was contacted in 2003 and asked if I would write the protocol for the study, working with the scientific steering group. So I found the original letter, which is with the first draft of the protocol in July 2003. Please find attached the first draft of the protocol for the New South Wales Healthy Generation Cohort Study for comment. And what's quite interesting is actually that the overall design really didn't change a great deal from then. What changed was a lot of the detail. And so this was the overall design, which I've put up every single collaborators meeting. But what's really wonderful, I say, is that it started off as a concept. And one of the things that I've also noted from going through these things is how much people have really have borne with us over the years, when the first meetings were really about potential. So we start off with the recruitment questionnaire, potential for additional detailed data collection. This is where we are now, the follow-up at the 10-year point. And this is the future. The linkage to routine data and other data linkage have already happened, and we do have a large number of nested studies and of studies taking place within the framework of the study now. So that was the original thing. We got the name of the 45 and up study pretty early on. It was actually a friend of my mum's who I considered the arbiter of taste. I was sort of saying, there's this, healthy futures, healthy generation. And she said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's a study of people 45 and over. And she said, well, why don't you just call it the 45 and over or 45 and up study? And so I also realised that if you're in a collaborative meeting and there are lots and lots of studies, you'll always be alphabetically first if you have 4 or 5, if you have a number. So that was another motivating factor. But anyway, we did struggle a little with the logo. This to me looks frankly scary. No offence to the people who worked hard to make it. I'll see if I can get it from it. There we go. Yeah, anyway, this was just some examples of the logo that I found, but we really hit on... when I was returning to Australia after a long time overseas, and I wanted something that gave me the essence of the sort of bush and of the blue skies, and something about the pleasure of being back, and that was why we've ended up with this logo, which is really just a gum tree. I understand that there was a koala on it at one point that was erased, but I'm not sure if that's true. Anyway, there is a cake outside it. It's been put on a cake, and I do think it looks fantastic. So it has stood the test of time. So the protocol was commissioned in 2003, and then 2004 was a very big year because there was the launch of the Institute for Health Research, which became the Sachs Institute, and at the same time the launch of the 45 and up study. And I remember when I came back to Australia in late 2003 and joined the Institute for Health Research, I think there were only 3 people. It was Sally Redman, Michelle McGovern, and me. So you can really see that as the Sachs Institute's grown, the 45 and up study's grown, and it's a real honour to have been part of that development. We had the establishment of what were called theme groups, which were groups of researchers who were generating hypotheses and potential questionnaire items. We had our very first collaborators meeting, a lot of development of study materials. We also had an external review, which I think was really fantastic to have, where the Cancer Council New South Wales, before they funded it, actually had an international group really look at the protocol. And the National Heart Foundation joined us at that point as a partner as well. And really between those 2 groups really helped us to get it started. So this is the very first program for the collaborators meeting in 2004. And as I've said, I do thank you for bearing with us over the years because quite honestly, it's a little bit boring. It really was sort of registration and coffee, welcome. Valerie Beryl did a brilliant talk about the Men and Women study. And then there was study progress, except that, well, it was just really at the beginning. Some lunch. And then there were reports from the theme committee. So what you can really see is that this is, although it was a collaborators meeting in that it really was us getting together and designing the study together. We really didn't have much to show for it, and that's really to do with the stage that the study was at. This is the next year's one, really rather similar, but also longitudinal study, speaker to be arranged. I'm not sure who it was. And then we had report on study progress and some information and panel, and then the theme committee chair. So you can see that for quite a while, we think things went very rapidly with the 45 and up study, but there really was quite a long period of time where we really had to make sure we were really serving the needs of researchers and that we were developing it. Now, this was the launch in early 2004, and this is the Frank Sato, who was the health minister at the time. And I just want to point out that he'd just given a speech, and he's as vertically challenged as I am, and we had quite a lot of media, and you can see these are the microphones from the different radio people. It was very hard for him to see over it, so he was going like this. I had noticed that there was a telephone directory in the lectern, and I actually pulled the telephone directory out and stood on that, and I could just see over. But the look on Frank Sartor's face when I did that, he was pretty annoyed, wasn't Sally? Sally's nodding. But the thing is, we also learned from experience at the SACS and 45 and up, because the following, later on, this was later in 2004, we had the collaborators meeting. I found another telephone directory. I've grown as the study has grown. I'm actually standing on 2 telephone directories for that one. Anyway, you can also see that this was in the beautiful Sydney Hospital lecture theatre. And you can also see this is the audience, the riveted audience at the very first collaborators meeting. So you can see that the number of people attending has grown, and the photography has improved quite a lot, thank you. But you can really see that there's a lot of the usual suspects there. And in particular, this is Valerie Beryl and Freddie Cedars, but also Tony Thirlwell, who was head of the New South Wales division of the Heart Foundation at that time, a very important supporter. And here are some examples of the reviewers' comments. So we had Peter Smith, Jean Cal, Sylvia Francesi and Conrad Damrozek. Unfortunately, 2 of the reviewers have actually died early, so I'd like to pay a tribute to the contribution they've made. Here we have, there are a few large cohorts which have not yielded important new insights into disease causation. The disadvantage of the approach is it's expensive, and it is some years before the most relevant results emerge. However, this does not detract from the inherent value of the approach. And then this is from Jean Cal from the US. If this cohort is truly able to have passive follow-up, that is, participant response is not required, so the large-scale linkage that we do have for the outcomes other than cancer and death, that would be truly unique and very valuable. And then this is Sylvia Francesi. I strongly believe that the 45 and up study should be supported, and that will greatly contribute to the expansion of epidemiological knowledge and preventive strategies for many years to come. And this is, I won't attribute this to anyone, the imagination or salesmanship of the authors appears somewhat limited. So we did have a few. Anyway, so on that basis, the study was funded. And I'd just like to take a moment, because Jean Cal was a true friend of the study from then on, and she came to our 2007 collaborators meeting, and she'll be really missed. So then 2005, an even busier year, a lot of time spent talking to Medicare Australia, and if anyone from Medicare Australia is in the audience, it's been just fantastic working with you and really working through all of the different issues. It's really through that strong relationship with Medicare Australia we're able to do the sampling and the linkage that we want, that we need to do. And I'd particularly like to thank Ken Patterson over that time. We also got ethical approval, and this was no small feat, because the idea was not to send out any questionnaires until we were absolutely sure that all the organisations we might want to do future data linkage with agreed with our study materials, agreed with our consent processes, and would let us do data linkage. We didn't want to get 10 years down the track and have an organisation say, well, no, actually, that's not going to cut the mustard. So we ended up getting agreement from 8 different agencies and committees before we sent out anything. And I'd like to thank those committees for the hard work they've done in keeping us on track. We also had the pilot study at that stage, which demonstrated the feasibility, and we finalised the study materials. We also convened the Community and Ethical Oversight Committee, and their methods and recommendations had a really large and lasting effect on our study. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Irene Moss, who chaired that committee and is also a key member of the SACS Institute board now and has been a great supporter. Also, Betty Johnson and John Chalmers, I can acknowledge there. I've forgotten the name of that person. Tom Reeve, that's right. So, and Bruce Barrowclough, yeah. So thank you for the cues there. Anyway, really, really important supporters of the study, but also people who've really influenced it from a participant point of view about how it should be best conducted. And just also like to acknowledge Leonie Young from Beyond Blue, who came on board as a supporter, and there's Andrew Penman there, who's been a great supporter, and David Clark, and also Julianne Mitchell from the Heart Foundation. So a lot of people have made it all possible. So then in 2006 to 2008, I've just sort of summarised that quickly. That's really when we recruited people into the study. And so what you can see is a sort of development phase, a recruitment phase. And now I think we're really in a phase, although we still see it in terms of following people up and maintaining the cohort, it's really about use of the cohort and particularly the use for policy. So we had Beyond Blue, the Department of Health and Ageing, Disability and Home Care join us. Recruitment was completed and the CEIF study was funded. I tried to find photos of people from TADC, and actually it's sort of like those elusive government people. They didn't seem to appear in anything. So it's not for... and Xingjing Chen was one of the very important people involved in that. Anyway, it's really great that you actually got to speak today, because I've got no evidence of people of TADC's existence prior to that. Anyway, it's been fantastic. And the CEIF study was very important funding. When I look back at the proposal, we actually hadn't recruited anyone into the 45 and up study when that was funded. We just said, we've done a pilot study, it looks feasible. So it's really terrific that that study's been able to be underway and to support so much. So when I think about the people who made that recruitment and consolidation part possible, I do really think of Sonia Wutzke, I think of Alison Cowell, I think of a lot of the other people who've really supported that time. I actually had a baby in late 2005, so the very first questionnaire being sent out really coincided with me being really out of action. So I actually think that Sally Redmond, Marion Karam, and a lot of other staff really made that happen, and really show that continuity of people is what really has made the 45 and up study what it is. So now we have 26,153 men and women at baseline. This is them geocoded across New South Wales. It's over 1 in 10 people in this age group, and we now have the baseline questionnaire and not only consent for long-term follow-up, we've actually started that follow-up process. So that's Sonia Wutzke there. And this is the summary of progress that we're up to. We've now got 138 projects that have applied to use data from the study, and 119 of those have been approved. 65 are actually active. And what's interesting now is we've got 16 that are completed. So even though we only finished recruitment it carried over a little bit into 2009, we actually have projects that have not only started, some have finished. We have 474 researchers across a huge number of organisations using the data, and in particular there's over 50 early career researchers who are using the data. So I was saying in the partner meeting this morning that I had to go overseas to be able to use large-scale data for my work and to learn about it, and other people don't have to do that. They can stay here if they want. We also have had 40 grants approved, and that's around 17 million in leveraged funding. So that doesn't include the partner supports, but it's actually money that has been leveraged for project-specific funding. And we're at 73 peer-reviewed papers, and that seems to be, we've got quite a lot of momentum there. It's really quite hard to keep up with the list of publications. So Kate Curtis and I are constantly going, have you got this one? Yeah, I've got that one. Oh, this one came out last week. So that's really terrific. And this is the graph of the funding and publications. This black line is the funding, and this is the axis for that. So that's showing us getting up to 17 million, a steady increase in funding. And this is the number of peer-reviewed publications, and you can see that too has a really steady momentum to it. But it's not enough to say that we've got these numbers. It's really about what we've actually achieved. And because it's such a wide range of areas, it's pretty much impossible for me to summarise. And I actually think it's a mark of success that it's impossible for me to summarise, because it's a very diverse area. And this year we've chosen not to have a keynote speaker, but to really have as the keynotes people using data from the 45 and up study. So some of those achievements will be showcased after morning tea. We have big achievements including the first Aboriginal data on Aboriginal participants from the study, work on smoking and mortality, use of the study for health services research, and also the final findings of the first randomised trial within the study being published from the Credo trial. So I'm going to just summarise or just showcase a few different things, achievements that have happened, but I think it's really the rest of the day that will showcase for you the kinds of things that are happening, including all the afternoon sessions, which are very huge, very large number. As I've said, there are also a large number of projects underway. So these publications are really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a huge number of projects that are actually underway and will yield publications and findings in the years to come. A lot of publications have been in international journals, and there's increasing evidence of policy impact. I'm just going to give you some examples now. So the first one is from the HALE study, and this is a study that's really done on a subset of people in the 45 and up study, and it's an example of how the framework can be added to really get detailed information. So if you imagine the overall kind of denominator is the New South Wales population aged 45 and older, we've then got the 45 and up study, which is that 10% sample, and the HALE participants were 200 men and women aged in their late 70s at the time of sampling, and they were living in the community. The main aim of the study is really to look at the factors that support people ageing independently and in place, and they were resident in local government areas with highest density of people aged 75 and over. So you see the list there. What's terrific was actually the willingness of people to take part. It's actually a very high response rate in that 260 people completed the questionnaire and 200 home visits were conducted. And it's a bit hard to see on here, but that the publication occurred just after last year's collaborators meeting. So, and just take a moment to acknowledge the authors there. So the main findings were that actually people's homes had a lot more hazards in them than they really thought. I think this is amazing. This is sort of like almost designed to confuse you about your depth perception as you're going up that stair, but no handrail either. So this is the percentage here, and this was the proportion of homes that had these different hazards in them. It's really a very broad summary of what was found, but you can see no grab rail, difficulty identifying stair edges, loose mats, non-slip floors. I'm not sure if was this an absence of non-slip? Yeah, an absence of non-slip mats. So we know that a lot of falls and problems happen within the home, and this was just an example of the problems that people hadn't identified. What was, I think, interesting was that 27% of homes scored 8 or more out of the 25 possible hazards. So it wasn't just that there was one thing. People actually had a number of these different hazards happening. So at the time when it was published, there were a number of things set in motion, and the Office for Ageing convened a high-level working group at that point, and that included representatives across a really broad range of areas that we don't really necessarily think of as directly related to health. So they included architecture, building and planning, design, and also New South Wales government agencies. And there have been a number of different considerations about progressing that. So it's really a watch this space. And I think this is another example of what happens with policy change, is that it's often quite difficult to pick up, it's difficult to capture. It's been an issue within the Sachs Institute trying to work out how do we work out whether we've had an impact or not. So it's also a call for all of you. If you have messages that something you've done has some sort of impact on something, do let us know, because it's really important to keep track of it. Then last year at the collaborators meeting, I talked about the findings on sitting time and mortality, and this is just an example of the media that happened around it. The main findings were that the longer people sit, the more likely they are to die in the ensuing years. And there was a lot of media around it. Some of it was quite funny, and it really went across different countries. But I think what all of us will have noticed is that it's hard to pin anything on that specific paper. But there's been an increasing change within offices and within a lot of places that people need to get more active in the workplace. And I've been really noticing that it's becoming quite normal to have a standing desk, whereas that used to be eccentric or visionary types. In fact, Bruce had one for a lot longer than everybody else, I seem to remember. So that's just one example of something that's probably been part of a general recognition of the need to get more active more generally. We also had, over this last year, a paper on erectile dysfunction and cardiovascular disease where we followed 95,000 men forward over time, and this was an initiative of the Cardiovascular Research Network supported by the National Heart Foundation. There were 7,800 hospitalisations for cardiovascular disease after follow-up. And what we found was a gradually increasing risk of cardiovascular disease with increasing severity of erectile dysfunction at baseline. These cardiovascular disease were generally ischemic events, ischemic heart disease, stroke, but also conduction disorders. And we also found it was a risk marker for repeated events. So this is seen as an important primary or secondary prevention opportunity. We released the findings in collaboration with the Heart Foundation, and the Heart Foundation actually noted increasing calls to their helpline from men at the time, which they would generally translate into people actually going to their general practitioner and getting screened. So the importance of this findings is that men have been defined as a hard-to-reach group in terms of cardiovascular screening. So this is an early warning sign that should prompt them to actually get screened, and also a motivator for change in lifestyle. It was published in the international journal PLOS Medicine, and I think thanks to the Heart Foundation spokesman's term, which was, he coined the term the canary in the trousers, for the potential for erectile dysfunction to signal occult heart disease, it went kind of viral. So we had around 350 or more articles nationally and internationally. We even got in Le Figaro, so we've got a French version of Les Troubles de l'érection. We got into Time magazine, and this is from Deutsche Welle radios, sort of the tragedy of it all. So we've also had been approached by people in New Zealand about using the data for a decision aid about cardiovascular screening and also prostate cancer screening. So that's also looking like it's had some policy impact. So that's really my summary of some examples of the achievement, but I really think that you need to look over the rest of the day and look at the publications and the website to get a real feel for where we are now and what we've achieved, because it's actually pretty difficult to summarise it generally. So I'm just going to talk about some of the priorities, and I'm going to go into more depth about the follow-up. We're also going to be doing some work around streamlining the ethics at the moment. It's been, as you can imagine, when I'm now up to my 142nd ethics application during my lifetime. So streamlining ethics is something that means a lot to me, and we're looking forward to working with New South Wales Health and Population Health and Health Services Committee in trying to streamline that. We've also got a number of enhancements that we're looking at, including linkage of data to private pathology data sets and exploring web-based questionnaires and the analysis for policy program. So one of the really great things that's been happening over the last year is the addition of a number of new staff, and that includes Betty Liu and Mark Bartlett, and also Mirella Petrucco, I don't know if I've pronounced her name properly, really who are going to help us to move forward on these areas, but also to make the work of the 45 and up study both more relevant to policy and more accessible to policymakers. So I'm just going to talk about the follow-up now. The follow-up survey, this is what it looks like. It took quite a bit of putting together. It had a lot of different input, including input from the policy agencies and partners that we work with. 41,000 questionnaires were sent out in September 2012, and reminders were sent in February. We've actually got 86,000 questionnaires that are due to be sent out in October, November, so really very soon. And the idea is to follow 50,000 people up every year from now on, because as we get to the end of following up the last lot, it'll be time to follow up the first lot. So if we can keep that steady stream going, that's what we're planning. Oops. So we were very, very pleased with the response to the questionnaires, because if you consider the amount of time that's gone by since these people filled in their questionnaire, we actually had 65,000 returning a complete and consented questionnaire. Now that's actually almost identical to the response rate to follow up in the Million Women study, and it's actually higher than the response rate that we had to the CEIF questionnaire. So it really does underlie the ongoing commitment of people in the study. We had 32% who just didn't return anything, a number who had left the address, and a number who were deceased. At the moment, we've got 18,000 questionnaires that have been consent checked and completely processed. As you can see, it's actually quite a laborious process going through these questionnaires. And we've actually, because of the way the questionnaires are processed, the women got processed first. So what I'm presenting here is mostly data from women, but they're presented stratified by male and female, so hopefully you'll be able to follow. And I'm focusing on the new questionnaire items that were added in at the instigation of investigators and also partner organisations. So have you ever been a blood donor? We've actually got roughly divided into half the population. So I think that also underlies that the people in the study are cooperative and generous people. This is a question that the Heart Foundation specifically was interested in. Has a doctor ever told you have heart failure? This is recognised as a really important and under-recognised health problem, and we're looking at 5 to 10% there. Atrial fibrillation, slightly more common than heart failure, but also a very important health problem. And then have you ever had the flu vaccine? We actually had 70% of the group saying that they have had flu vaccination. So because we've been able to link the data to notifiable diseases, it's going to be a very interesting area to be looking at in the future. This is a very important question that we really wished we'd had on the baseline question, which is about pain. And this question is, how much bodily pain have you had during the past 4 weeks? And really, from an epidemiological point of view, you couldn't wish for a better distribution to investigate something. It's very evenly spread. Not that I'm glad that people out there are in so much pain. That's not what I'm saying. But really what you can see is that it's very evenly divided between people who have no pain and people who have all the way up to moderate pain. If we look at whether that pain was bad enough to limit usual activities, that's actually around between 10 and 15% of people. So it's obviously a lot of people are coping with pain in their day-to-day lives. This is a question that Bruce Armstrong suggested we include. Do you ever use medication, e.g. Viagra, to have an erection that is firm enough for satisfactory sexual activity? And this is following up on the erectile dysfunction question, because we just asked a question generally about erectile functioning, but we hadn't asked about Viagra. So it makes it easier to interpret it. And in fact, there is virtually no data nationally about the number of people taking Viagra. I tried to look in the veterans database because it's actually subsidised for veterans but not for everybody else. And what we find is that 10% of men say that yes, they do use Viagra, and about 4% say they'd rather not answer that question. So it's actually really quite common, the use of Viagra. These are questions that are of direct relevance to the Cancer Council. Have you ever been screened for colorectal bowel cancer? So we already know this is about 70%. But we also asked whether the person was tested because of an invitation to the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program. And people are pretty evenly divided between whether it's no or yes there. And we did also ask whether their test was abnormal, and that was a bit under 10%, which I think is broadly in keeping with what we would expect. But anyway, it'll be very interesting to investigate those results more. And this is a question that people within New South Wales Health are interested in. It's about sunscreen. When you're outdoors between 11 and 3 for 5 minutes or more, how often do you wear sunscreen? And once again, people are really very evenly split on all that, although I think the men are a bit less likely than women to use sunscreen, but we'll have to check that when we've got bigger numbers. There's some further questions that are of relevance to the mental health area, which is really about symptoms of mental health problems in older people, particularly men, where it's not manifested as being sad or depressed, but in fact as being irritable or grumpy. And none of the time, I think it's interesting, between 30 and 40% of people are never grumpy or irritable, and everybody else is sort of across that spread there. But there aren't that many people who are grumpy most of the time or all of the time. We have a few more other questions. These are just broadly speaking, and that can be a marker of underlying depression that's not been recognised. And during the last 4 weeks, how often were you unable to stop or control worrying? So most people say none of the time, but there's actually a fair number of people are experiencing anxiety symptoms. So I had one more thing if I'd gotten time to talk about, and I do have it, because I think translation into policy or getting research into policy is extremely important, but for me, a key milestone in the 45 and up was its translation into comedy. So I considered it a very big moment in my working life when the findings from the sitting time and mortality paper were actually sent up on the Chaser. I don't know if I mentioned this last year, but they did a show about latest medical breakthroughs, and they had the sort of usual crackpot things about people drinking breast milk as an adult drinking breast milk to make them better. But in between each of the segments, there was this big warning sign that said, "Do not sit down." Latest research says, "Stand up," okay? And they had these people saying, warning, do not sit. And these are the sort of boffins announcing it, and they're obviously casually sitting down, and look what happens. I know, it's terrible. Anyway, that kept happening through the program. So anyway, that is, I think, there's policy impact, and then there's comedy impact. So that's a very big part. And so finally, I'd really like to say some really big thank yous. Obviously, I've mentioned a lot of different people during this talk, and it goes without saying that Sally Redman, Bruce Armstrong, and Freddie Cetus have been really key people here. But I'd particularly like to thank people who've been working behind the scenes. I mentioned Sonia Wutzker, so there's also Kate Curtis, I think Chris Rogers is here, Mirella. But I'd particularly like to thank someone who I think of as the heart of 45 and Up, and someone who's actually really worked very hard and always been there, and in many ways has had a lot of, integrity and patience with the whole process. So that's Alison Cowell, and I've got a little presentation to make to her. I'm sure many of you have spoken to Alison over the time, particularly if you're really doing sub-studies or anything in detail in the 45 and up, and you'll know about the meticulousness and dedication to her work. So it's a real pleasure to be able to thank her. And I'd also like to thank anybody who I haven't managed to thank in the course of this, and particularly Sarah Thackaway from New South Wales Health. I don't think I've really paid due tribute to New South Wales Health, whose support for the Sachs Institute and for the 45 and Up has really underpinned and provided a fantastic foundation. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but I did want to say I'm looking forward to joining you at morning tea. I'm particularly looking forward to the cake in the afternoon, and to really actually letting the 45 and Up study speak for itself. Thank you.